Well, this talk has an unusual genesis, or not an unusual, but different than all the rest. It's the result of a very peculiar question and answer session. There were several surprises in it, a couple of them anyway. And the first surprise was that there would be only time for one question, 90 minutes for one question. The second one was that the question was already asked. Sometimes I like to do spontaneous question and answer sessions, but sometimes people give me questions, and I try to keep relevant. If I have to speak a lot with a whole new crowd that I've never spoken to before, I'll always do it as a question and answer session, because that's the best way to be where the people are at. And then it isn't me, but it is us. So a person asked this question, and it was such a good question that I decided to do a talk out of it. And it was the result of somebody asking the question, what is the meaning of the word soul? And so what this talk will be about is, what is the meaning of the word soul? And since it's such a very important question, it seems a wise thing that we should go into it. So the title for the talk is, what is soul? It could just as well be, what is a soul? Or, what is spirit? Or, what is a spirit? It's the kind of thing that the words soul and spirit have so many meanings, and some of them are quite divergent, that it's important to distinguish what one means when one is using those words. What's really difficult is that the two words are often used interchangeably, and indiscriminately so that they're almost indistinguishably blurred with each other. So we'll start, and this will be a really simple talk. This will be a warm-up for Monday, because we'll cover some of the same material on Monday, but we'll do it much more extensively, and we'll try to go into it much more experientially. This should help out quite a bit, because often when we're listening to talks like this, and we've heard talks using the same words with different meanings from other sources, it gets to be very confusing. It would be really nice if there were one meaning for each word, but that's nearly impossible, because common usage has blurred those words so much, and it's so indelible in our language, that it's just not going to get there. It would be a specialized kind of jargon if we had only one word with one meaning. So we're going to try to be definite as we possibly can be, but we may not be able to change the world. As far as finding the right words for spiritual things, there are not enough words in the English language to go around for all of the states of spirit that there are, or all of the things that are pointed to by the word soul. So we're at a loss in terms of language. Our language is just too scarce. The language is growing, but it's growing in the direction of materialism, and there are all kinds of words to describe material things and material states, but not very much that speaks to inward things. Some people try to solve this problem by bringing in or introducing words from other languages, but often that only makes things worse, because other languages have the same problems that English does. And those problems are usually with the same words or the same kinds of words. And it's all because our earthly language is not really suited to spiritual things. And when you bring in words from another language, another problem is introduced. Cultures and their languages are usually imbued with a cultural spirit, a very definite spiritual being, and a language, and all the words in a language are part of a gestalt. They're part of that culture. And you can't just pull a word out of a culture and have it live any more than you can take a fish or whatever lives in the sea out of the sea and have it live. So it's a tough kind of thing to do that. What often happens is if you take a word out of one culture and put it into another culture where it doesn't have the whole context of meaning supporting it that it did in its original culture, is you get something very ugly. It's like you have a world that is all yellow and you suddenly throw in something red. You can get something pretty glaring and get pretty ugly. It's perfectly fine to find parallels in cultures because those parallels can help you to understand what you're doing in your own cultural context. And probably the best example of that is the key signatures in music. You can play, at least in diatonic music, you can play the same piece of music in each of the 12 different keys. Even though the intended nature of that piece of music is best in one key, you can understand things about it by playing it in different keys. And each key will bring out a different flavor. But you can't, suppose it's a rather sophisticated piece of music, something very elaborate, and it's written in one key, and there's something that you want to say, you just can't take a snippet or then you can't make a collage. You can't take something out of another key signature and just throw it right in the middle. You can do it. I think some modern composers try to do that sort of thing. But it isn't the same thing. You can change keys, but it requires a resolution to be able to do that. So you just can't put something in and hope that it's going to jibe with everything else, because it isn't. After many, many rebirths and passing through many cultures, we eventually begin to see reality not from just one cultural context, but from the point of view of all of them. And eventually we become people that can see reality without having to have culture, and we can just take it straight forward. And we can be adaptive. We can be like Leonardo da Vinci, he was a master artist, he was a master scientist, he was known in his times for being a magician. When he walked down the street, people were in awe of him because he was so beautiful. And he was strong enough that he could bend horseshoes. So this is somebody that has it all. That's somebody that doesn't need to specialize and doesn't need one particular point of view. However, when we get to that point, we'll probably be entering into the spiritual worlds anyway, and then we'll have whole new problems of language and a different kind of language. So let's begin with a really simple, very generic use of the word soul. If we say Fred is the soul of the team, or if we say that Melissa is the soul of the orchestra, what do we mean? We do not mean that Fred or Melissa is an entity or a being that takes over the bodies or personalities of the group and directs them, because each person on that team or in that orchestra is self-conscious and is intact. So in this sense of the word, Melissa is the soul of the orchestra. We're not using the word soul to mean a being, nor do we mean that they're made up of a common stuff. Even though they breathe the same air, maybe not exactly as in the sense of a conspiracy, they're discrete. They're not made up of the common stuff. What we mean when we use the language this way is that Fred or Melissa has more influence in the group, and it probably means that Fred or Melissa has more of the character or of the stuff of that group that is in common. They have more in common with everyone else. But when you use the word soul in this most generic sense, we mean that it's a common quality of attitude that is shared by the group, and that one person represents that more than everyone else. So that is the soul of a group. That's not a common usage of soul. It's very diffuse. We hear it from time to time, but in these talks, when we use the word soul, that's not what we mean. In Western culture, in religion and philosophy, there is another usage of the word soul that is not quite so down to earth, but it is quite common. Albeit this usage is also taken for granted, and it is as unclear as it is taken for granted. In the second usage of the word soul, it's usually used together with two other words, one clearly known, the other not so clearly known, and they're taken together as a triad. That's perfectly acceptable. We hear the phrase, a human is body, soul, and spirit. Though this is not always clearly understood, this usage of the word soul is a comparative. It's less indistinct, or I should say more distinct than the first usage. It's more clear. It's more definite than the first usage. So it's really not as definite as we would like it to be. All we have to do is open our eyes, or touch our skin, or look in the mirror, and we have a definite experience of body. By now we're all very familiar with the concept of our physical body anyway. If we study this comparative set of body, soul, and spirit in religion and philosophy, ever since the time of Socrates, we see this same usage that we find in general usage. So philosophers and everyday people speak of body, soul, and spirit. It is a comparative in that body is gross. Soul is subtle, and spirit is more subtle, almost infinitely subtle, if you like that word, infinity. But it's also a comparison in orientation. The body is personal. Soul is less personal. Spirit is impersonal. If we combine these comparatives that almost everyone who has ever used the comparatives, body, soul, and spirit, you get a fairly dynamic attitude about what you mean when you say body, soul, and spirit. Body has a fixed personal attitude. It's mine, and it's constant, and it stays that way. Soul, in this usage, has a fluidic and animative attitude. It gets things done. Spirit, in this usage, is rare, and it's impersonal, and it's encompassing. this is what is meant by body, soul, and spirit in this kind of usage. Then we ask ourselves, what is spirit? Now we're really in trouble. How do you use words to say what spirit is? Let's take a very poetic quote. Without trying to point at it, or draw it, or something like that, Lao Tzu had a very lovely definition for spirit. He said, spirit is that which accomplishes everything while appearing to do nothing. Spirit is that which accomplishes everything while appearing to do nothing. So he is saying that everything is within a spirit that is so subsistent in its own existence that it accomplishes things holistically within its own being, and it isn't like us if we push an automobile or we have this kind of direct activity. Someone were aware with very deep seership, they would say yes, but even the thing that we point our finger or push a car, all of that is also a manifestation of a very holistic activity, but that's the relationship between body, soul, and spirit. Soul, in this usage, is everything that is between body and spirit, between the particular thing which does things directly and the universal spirit that does things holistically or indirectly. So soul, in this sense, is quasi-personal. And it is a doer, but it is the kind of doer that translates holistic activity into specific activity. Difficult things, these are all difficult things to talk about. Symbolically, the spirit has by all peoples been represented by the circle or the ring or whatever. It has no beginning, it has no end. The soul is represented by the semicircle, and the body is represented either by the cross or by the square. So astrologically, the sun, which has as its symbol a circle with a central point, represents spirit. The moon represents soul, and in astrology, the ascendant, which doesn't have a symbol, except that it is the horizon, represents body. Now this usage of the term body, soul, and spirit has permeated Western culture quite a bit. It was formalized by Aristotle and his followers, not only in his time, but the followers that came later on, the scholasts and the logic choppers and all of those people. And what they called soul or world soul, they call it animus mundi, meaning the animating force of the world. Not just the spirit that animates through a spirit of having something accomplished, but an animating force. The dictionary will tell you that the spirit is an animating principle, whereas the soul in this usage is an animating force. So this is found a lot in our culture. In psychology, the psychologists use the Latin term for the word soul, and they call it the psyche. Some of them go even much further, and they gender the face of the soul that points toward the body and that abuts the physical body. They call it the body they call the persona, and they call it, they gender it as animus or anima, depending on whether the gender of the body of a human is female or male. Each of these meanings in this definition of the word soul add to the complexity, but at the same time they clarify. They clarify some aspect of what is meant about the state of being that is called soul relative to body and spirit. For mystical aspirants like ourselves, they tell us something, but they're not enough. When we hear the words like the face of the soul that addresses the persona, or that faces the persona, we want to and need to in a scientific way, because that is what we are now. We have moved beyond merely philosophizing about these things to science, where we get to know them. We want to know precisely what the persona is, or precisely what the psyche is and how it works, so that we can be awake and aware of it, and so that we can use it, and so that we can see its purpose in existence. In a similar way, we want to know what is the face that faces the physical body. So we have to look at what mysticism, and most notably Christian mysticism, has to say about this. In Christian mysticism, we do not use the word soul in this usage. But that does not mean that we're not familiar with the concept. Because as Christian mystics, we're very familiar with the inner worlds. And we try to see them in our experience every day. We become more aware of how vital life works in us. Or we become more aware every day of what we're doing when we're thinking. So we try to be very much aware of the inner worlds, whether they are spirit or in those realms that are called soul. We know that there is something between the spirit and the dense physical body, but we're much more accurate about it. So to give a simple answer in terms of Christian mysticism to this meaning of the word soul, what is between the dense body and the spirit, we would say the vital body, which is made of a state called the ethers, and that the vital body is indeed gendered opposite of the physical body, and it produces some kind of an internal-external balance. And we would say that soul, in this sense of the term, included the desire nature and the concrete mind. There's something that we don't do as Christian mystics, and I think it may be a weakness. We deal more with the mechanics of the worlds and how they interact with each other than we do with the story side of it. And I think that might be an error. The story side of it. You can describe what happens in your consciousness when your desire body is struggling with your vital body, trying to push it to do things that are exertions rather than the maintaining of the physical body. And you can talk about the kinds of desires that you have that push it. And that's a very mechanical description of it. But if you talk to someone who's undergoing that kind of experience, there's always a story. And the same mechanical relationship in the inner bodies, if it is brought out in different people, each person has their story. In some cases, the stories are exactly like myths, and they're patterned on myths. In fact, it's a very big part of psychological understanding to understand what this story means. Now, you can look with clairvoyance, and you can say that there is this kind of formation or entity that's building up in the desire body, and you can see its shape, and you can understand what it means and how it's stressing, perhaps fracturing the whole desire nature by becoming too much of an entity unto its own. But that's not what the person inside is experiencing. They may be experiencing a struggle inside of a love triangle. And at the same time, they're loving one person, they're hating their rival in the triangle. And that story is a very important story, and that is the way the spirit that is inside sees it. And I think that in modern Christian mysticism, whether it's the Rosy Fellows or the Anthropops, I think there is not enough emphasis on connecting what is happening in people's consciousness as far as the story, both their personalized story and the universal story in the myth, so that what they're feeling in their consciousness, that they can connect that with what's happening in their bodies and in the principles that function in their bodies. And that is why I think a lot of people feel removed from our spiritual teachings, even though they recognize that those teachings are true. It just doesn't relate to what they're feeling, and it doesn't relate to what their thoughts are. And I think somehow we have to build bridges into that. I think I myself would like to be a bridge builder in that activity. So, by this usage of soul, it is meant the composite of the etheric vital body, the desire body, and the concrete mind. This composite can be seen with clairvoyance. It's subtle, and it's fluidic, and it has its own kind of consciousness, just as we've been talking about it. It has an attitude, and it has a quality that is all its own. And these things go so far that it is somewhat autonomous. And sometimes soul, as distinguished from body or spirit, is even rebellious from the spirit. That is, it is an entity or a being. Some people call it a lower nature or something like that. This is what the psychologists deal with. They deal only with the activities that are going on in it, and very few recognize that there is a spirit behind that, and that spirit, though much more subtle, is much more powerful. So this concept is a very important concept. This reality of a semi-autonomous soul which serves the spirit and which serves the body, but sometimes acts independently, it's a reality, even though we don't use it, because that use of the word soul is a very unfortunate use. So we've looked at two usages of the word soul. This is almost like one of those pedantic little classes where you're talking about this means this, that means that. But it is an important thing to look into. Now this second usage is much more distinct than the first use of the word soul. But this is not the way it is used in Christian mysticism. And it is not the way that the word soul is used in these talks. So let's try to go to that use of the word soul. In Rosicrucian Christian mysticism, the usage of the word soul is far more specific, and it's far more explanatory, and if you can grasp the concept and bring it to consciousness in your own experience, it's a much more useful definition or use of the word soul. Using English language as clearly as I possibly can, which may not be good enough, there is an extremely simple definition of the word soul as used in Christian mysticism. Soul is the spiritualized product of the body or bodies. soul is the spiritualized product of the body or bodies. Even though that's a very simple, extremely simple definition, or it's not an explanation, to understand its meaning requires quite a good deal of experience, an experience of soul and soulfulness that is clear enough to be described so that we can recognize it, so that we can deal with it in ourselves. Now, in trying to describe it or to point at the way those words are being used, we'll try as well as we can. This will not be very extensive. On Monday we will be more extensive about it because it has to do with the primary work of the Rosicrucian Fellowship. So let's try to do that without going to far-fetched extremes. Now, just a few minutes ago, we used an enigmatic or poetic description for the Spirit from Lao Tzu when we said that Spirit is that which does everything while appearing to do nothing. That's a little enigmatic and poetic, but it is a very good description. For some things, poetry is better than prose. Spirit is so subtle and so abstract and so indefinite in its being compared to the things of the body or the material world. You can't even say it's being, you might even say it's beingness. That it can't really be described the way one can describe a more definite substance. Spirit is boundless, and it's universal, and it's eternal. So you can't relate to it as a thing. You have to relate to it as a state. You can talk about attributes of Spirit. You can talk about the character of Spirit. You can talk about the essential nature. But those are about the only things that you can really say. And even when you talk about attributes or character or essence or essential nature, what you say has to be abstract. However, if we can comprehend it, abstraction is every bit as accurate as concretion. In fact, it's more accurate. She can tell you that mathematics is far more accurate than measuring. In abstract reasoning, it's extremely precise. It's either true or untrue. As an example, throughout these talks, we use the term universal spirit. We used it in such a way that it would almost seem as though it were one being or one beingness, and that it was possible for there to be another being or beingness of spirit. But that's impossible because they would both share the common being. The reason we use universal spirit in this way was to be able to speak of the one being in its unity while leaving the door open for discussing different foci or beings within that common state of being. So now it's time for the discussion of spirit used with an article, not as just universal spirit, but as the spirit or a spirit. Now this subject is exceedingly deep, and it's exceedingly difficult, and it's very hard thinking. And what we're going to do is going to be very shallow and almost simplistic. What we're going to do is we're going to use spiritual mathematics as a means of using abstract thought, you get the idea of spirit. I can't give you all an initiation into the experience of spirit, so what we'll try to do is to apperceive it by analogy. That's a good way to make the subtlest form possible for spirit, which is universal and does not lend itself well in understanding to a form. It's the most subtle way, or the most, I don't know how you'd say, the least limiting. In mathematics, a point is a reference. It's a statement of being. To the Pythagoreans, the point was defined as being in position. That point can be in the potentials in which we find spirit, or the two poles of potential in which we find spirit, time and space. That is, it's a point in time and or space simultaneously. Time and space are potentials which are capable of bearing or sustaining a relationship or spiritual relationship. The reference or locus that a point is can be as small as location only, without any size and space, or it can be as large as the universe itself. It doesn't make any difference. The point is a point. This gets very abstract. And it can be as small as an instant, as small of instant as can be conceived, or it can be the eternal now. Without getting bogged down in too much mind-boggling abstraction, we can say that in any number of dimensions, the smallest number of references that can define the simplest object using straight lines is 3. When there are 3 points and they are connected by implied lines, they form a thing. They form a triangle, which, even though it is a planar object, in any number of dimensions, to n dimensions, the simplest or the least number of points to define an object is 3. So it's a thing, even though it's a very flat thing. Similarly, if we're talking about the beingness of the spirit, and we talk about reference points, we say that the smallest number of reference points of consciousness in spirit that comprise a being is 3. Therefore, what is conceived as a self or a being that has a discrete existence, or a threefold spirit, or whatever term you want to use it, it has 3 points of reference that define its being. Whatever the result is within beingness or beingness or whatever, you have a spirit, an objectified state of consciousness that is the outlook of the entire universal spirit. Because a triangle defines all of space. It defines not only plane space, but n-dimensional space. It is an entity. And that entity is everything referenced within those 3 points, but the objectivity of that also defines all of the negative space that is beyond it. The viewpoints do not have to be fixed. They don't have to be stationary. but there is a constant referential relationship to each other. This gets very abstract again, and I'm trying to whip through something in a big hurry. The points can be location only, or they can be universal, but the result is the same. It results in a being. And the existence of a being abstractly represented by 3 points or 3 references doesn't preclude the existence of any other beings. In fact, it is from the proto-triangle that all other triangles are defined. All other beings are relatable to the, you might say, triangle of triangles. However, there will be triangularity for all of them. 2 points describe a line or a vector or a projection of consciousness within universal spirit. We say that somebody follows a line of thought. In the simple triangle of being, there are 3 such vectors or 3 such projections that produce the discrete triangle. These lines, as well as the foci where they meet, represent characteristics. Characteristics that are attributes or qualities shared by the 3 points of view. Now, in modern Christian mysticism, the 3 viewpoints of the Spirit are called, the first is called the Divine Spirit, the second is called the Life Spirit, and the third is called Human Spirit. They each have characteristics. The first, or the initial vertex, you might say, stands for, it isn't that, but it stands for simple being, the will to be, simple beingness, basic meaning, and that awareness that comes with it. Many schools say goodness. Very much like in the first statement in Genesis, when there is the first statement of existence, they looked on it and it was good. The second reference, or the second viewpoint of spirit is imagination. Looking at it cosmologically, it is an emanation, or it is an expression of the will. And its expression is unified in that it is called love, the unity that is holding it together. And the expression of the power of will is manifest in the second as light. It is the word for the unspoken truth of being. And because that truth expresses itself or emanates itself as love, it is associated with beauty. And in the West, this is called life spirit. The third reference point that completes it represents activity. Being is static, or it seems static. It just is. The understanding of that, or the manifestation of that, has a quality of life. But when there is a discrete being or a discrete activity of life and being, it becomes action. And the initial existence, when it is pinned down with that reference point, it becomes thought or an idea or something like that. It's truth. And so it is called the human spirit, because humans are beings that in a simple way have come to that being of a discrete being. Very abstract, and we're going through it very fast, but now we're talking about this as qualities or characteristics of consciousness within being that is eternal, timeless, boundless, all of those qualities. Mystics say there is a stuff or substance, but that's a tough thing to deal with, because that brings it into thinking about spirit as though it were material of some kind. And the quality of substance is as abstract as the idea of substance, if not more so. So we can say that there are realms of divine spirit and life spirit, but they're much better understood and recognized in our being and lived in our life if they are thought more in terms of abstract characteristics than in terms of stuff. Because as soon as you start thinking in terms of stuff, you think of forms of stuff, and you're not too many steps away from a god with a beard or something like that. So in spirit, we are all the same unity. We're all the same universality of spirit. And we all utilize the same characteristics to be aware of being. And even to be aware of ourself as a being. Because they're the same relationships. To know ourselves is to know God. God is an idea. It's the primordial triangle, just as we are an idea. And an idea is how spirit creates, and it is how it conceives of itself. Now, it is true that what is called the Supreme Being, that is the being, is far more powerful and far more awake in many respects than we are. But still, it is the same universal spirit. One of the general characteristics of a spirit is creation. And creation is part of a need for experience. I don't want to get into all kinds of things that we could get into here, but I'm just wanting to go through this to get to a point. The flip side of the need for experience, for new consciousness, is creativity. But since the spirit is self-subsistent, it just is, the need for new experience and to be giving itself creatively to itself is not like our need for food or air or friends or anything like that. We're only very limited manifestations. What we call spiritual intent and evolution by material function is a method whereby spirit creates and realizes itself. It can also be seen not only as a creative giving, but as a curiosity in regard to the unself-conscious parts of its own being. The potential spirit of itself. Oh, at this point I want to be careful because I get into way too many abstract things. Again, the need to become, or the curiosity to know, which is ultimately knowing itself, isn't anything like our uncertainty or our insecurity, because the Spirit is self-subsistent. It's just part of its character to become itself. It is internal to it. Its destiny is auto-generated. Using it as a simple analogy, which may be more exactly true to reality than we would guess, just as an artist creates and projects his or her dream, Spirit projects its dream into the unknown as a potential which we call time-space, the potential of what could be. Spirit then surrenders itself or gives itself totally to the dream. And in doing that, it goes beyond itself. And in going beyond itself, even though it was a dream or a playing make-believe to begin with, when it gives all of itself to it, total self-sacrifice, something of the unknown becomes known. And there is light, more light. The Spirit is more itself in itself. Now, this is very, very simplified. A very simplified view of our ongoing evolutionary creation. But it gets us where we need to go. Anyway, when the dream is projected into the unknown within itself, that projection from the different viewpoints of Spirit becomes varying grades of matter, as resistance or as congealed ignorance in the macrocosm. And beings within the universal Spirit, the microcosms, become or congeal bodies with varying functions and characteristics. This is a very complicated dream because there are so many perspectives of Spirit that the creation, in order to become more, is a very, very entailed kind of activity. As the Spirit materializes these bodies, it awakens in the interaction with these bodies to the unknown, and the bodies evolve. Concurrently, in the interaction of Spirit with matter, or spirits with bodies, as the unknown of matter, which is the, I guess you'd say, the solidification of ignorance, the known becomes known. The matter becomes spiritualized. This process is described in Christian mysticism as the materialization of Spirit in bodies, and through those bodies in the unknown as matter. Matter is spiritualized and brought into the general consciousness. And that matter which has been spiritualized by the interaction of the known with the unknown is called soul. Thus, soul is the spiritualized product of the body or bodies. Now, so far, this definition, body, has been mostly singular. In that sense, it can mean a particular body, like the dense physical body, or the composite of dense, vital, and desire bodies. Now that we have a general idea of soul and understand it a little bit, let's look at the process of soul growth a little bit more in detail. Not a lot, but a little bit more. When spirit, the first attribute of spirit, the being attribute of spirit, or the beingness attribute, because it is subsistent and it is intelligible, not necessarily intelligence, when it projects itself through itself into the unknown, it projects itself as the simplest kind of form and state of being. And relative to the unknown, that projection of being or of substance is the resistance to the act of will. So that our bodies take their form and hold their form and have their value relative to the spirit in that they are resistance and that they bring out the quality of will in the spirit by holding them, by being held into form. At first, the forms are extremely simple. We see that in evolution, even in just the material sense of evolution. The simplest forms are globs, like amoebas, things like that. That's the way we start out each time. When the egg is fertilized, it's just a little glob. When the second attribute of spirit, the life spirit, projects itself through itself into the unknown, congealed as matter, it is what does the formation. It is the imagination. In spirit, the second draws out the first, draws out the will, or it conceives without itself being a particular conception. And so, this working together of the idea of being and of drawing out of being in imaginative conception, when that is reflected in the projection through itself into matter, it becomes the life that supports the form in the same way that the life of the life spirit is a way that in its liveliness, the permanence or the irrefragable nature of will can be understood in the power that is emanated into the life that is light. Very difficult things to talk about or to even begin to grasp. Again, the vital body, or the body of life, evolves just as the physical form evolves. And we find in ourselves quite sophisticated vital bodies. We spent several lectures talking about them. When the third attribute of the spirit, the part that fulfills or completes the self, projects itself through itself into the unknown, into matter, it projects itself as a mover, as a separate being that motivates and moves the personality, and that in the bodies, that is what the desire body is. It is our vehicle of motivation. So that the experience of the boundless, if we want to think of it in terms of space, can be experienced by motion. As we saw in earlier talks, our desire body is in a very early state of development. It has most of its perfection still ahead of it. But nonetheless, it's a wonderful vehicle. finally, when the spirit, through the process of projecting itself, through the center of its being, becomes aware of that center of its being through which it's projecting itself, it becomes aware of that agency as mind. Previous to that, you could say it was something like a proto-mind or something like that. But when it becomes aware of the agency or of itself through which it is projecting itself, it is capable of being inside of every vehicle that it is projected and that has moved indirectly. It can then be inside and move things directly. This is a wonderful, wonderful state of being. This is where things like, I think, therefore I am, therefore I think I am, that's where these things come from. It's that moment of realization, which in the Bible is called, I am that I am. When in that moment of realization, that spirit not only realizes that it is a being, but that it came into being as a being by projecting its dream of what it could be, and when it passes into and is fully aware of the projecting agency, that we become fully and wonderfully awake. In that moment is an astounding realization. At this point, the involution is complete. It's not finished, but it's complete. Everything that is needed is there. And when the spirit can work inside of its bodies, it can bring its intelligence and focus it to where it was previously ignorant. And when that is the case, that ignorance, through the light of intelligent application, becomes aware. It wakes up. And as it wakes up, the stuff, the different grades of stuff, whether it's dense physical stuff for the will, or whether it is vital stuff for the life, it wakes up that stuff through all of the experience of having given itself to them, and each grade of that stuff that is awakened is taken into the spirit, because when the spirit goes into things, those things are taken into the spirit. And that's what soul growth is. So the spiritualized product of the self actually going through all the moods of desire that move things, that motivate things, all of the colors of feeling. When the spirit understands them and experiences them, both by reflection because it's ignorance, and eventually by penetration when it can live inside of all of those feelings, when that potential that could be self-conscious spirit but was just all-conscious but not self-conscious spirit beforehand, when that is made self-conscious or brought into self-consciousness, that results in what is called emotional soul. Similarly, when that focus of the spirit enters into its live and vital experience and brings into its consciousness that deeper state of existence through supporting life and allowing things to grow or bringing things to grow and supporting a form and nurturing it, when the self-consciousness is brought into that state of life, that supportive, growing, perceptive state of things, that results in what is called intellectual soul. And all of the impacts of spirit working against the resistance of primal matter, the dense matter, the stuff that makes it so hard for us to carry our body around because of gravity. Just the fact that we're walking around and having that experience of resistance, we're waking up the stuff of the unknown or the self-conscious unknown of the universal spirit. We're waking up to the will to be, and that part of the unknown that is now made known is called conscious soul. It's the most fundamental kind of soul because it has to do with the most basic existence. We're going to talk a lot about this on Monday. Now, we know this whole process is cyclical. In spirit, everything is a circle and it's eternal. In matter, everything is timely. Everything is fragmented and broken. Ignorance is like that. It's not, it's not continuous like pure ongoing truth. So between the two, between broken time and eternal spiritual awareness, there is the cycle. And so we have all of these cycles. We've talked quite a bit about them. The most fundamental cycle is for us, each as spirits, producing new bodies, new versions of the dream, and then living the dream out. And when we die, we remember all of those experiences. And the word remember means to put the members back together. We rethink. We re-experience the dream, only it's not now a dream, it's a reality. But the reality doesn't have to exist as everything that was in it. Just the essential reality has to be there. And that remembering is taking the essential experience or the essence of the experience and remembering it into the spirit, at which time the soul is incorporated into the spirit and the potentiality and, so to speak, the potency of spirit is enhanced according to how that is taken into the spirit. So it is an absorption and an assimilation. Assimilation is a spiritual word going back to the Platonists. It means things go back to their similar source. Just like in the body, every time we think, we burn sugar. So when we eat food, it is sugar that goes to the brain, that is assimilated to the brain. Whereas the heart does pumping, and it needs different kind of burning. It needs oils. So the oils that we eat are assimilated to the heart. So similarly, the different grades of soul are assimilated to their parent principle in the spirit. This rethinking or absorbing and assimilation is incomplete until a much later state of the evolutionary creation, but quite a good deal of it is done from life to life to life. Now let's try to talk about residual soulfulness. Emotional soul is soul food for the human spirit. But the whole process isn't complete because this is a very long, slow process of waking up and transforming reality from one kind of reality to a reality that is more of itself. So that the parts of the desire body that have been turned into soul, that have been spiritualized, are called the soul power or the emotional soul. And they are found in the three higher regions of the desire body. In someone who has experienced a lot through the desire body, we say that's somebody who's a soulful musician or something like that. It indicates how much one is motivated by higher emotions such as creativity, altruism, and general giving of self. The soulfulness that is found in the vital body some of which is assimilated into the spirit, but the spiritualized part of the vital body is found in the higher two regions of the vital body. And that is the light and reflecting ethers, whereby one who has soulful in this sense walks in light. And that light is not only just a light in the ethers, it is a light that is constantly relit by intuition from the life spirit, the pure truth. So, this is called intellectual soul. It's intellectual soul because it is all done by memory. We'll go into that in more detail on Monday when we go into this is a warm-up talk. The further one is going to be go much more into detail. So, this is intellectual soul. Ironically, for being called intellectual soul, it indicates someone who is very calm and peaceful, self-possessed, and self-remembering. It indicates the degree of intellectual imagination that one has to create and support life. It's getting awfully long and I have to be careful because we've got a long way to go yet. Oh, we're getting there. We're down to the last page of notes already. The location of conscious soul is a matter of speculation, because no known speaker or writer on spiritual topics, at least not known to me, has ever shared the information. But by analogy, one would expect that it would be found in the highest region of the dense body, in the air, in the gases. If the three highest soul regions of the desire body are soulful and the two higher regions of the vital body are soulful, that would mean by analogy that the one higher region, the gas or the air of the physical body, is where we find the soulful qualities. I don't know whether that would mean the residual air in the lungs or the gas in suspension or whatever. But it agrees with Scripture. In any case, the conscious soul is found in how well the Spirit understands the nature of matter. It is a touch or a feel for substance. We know that some technicians can do marvels with materials. Artists have a knowledge of the stuff that they're working with in paint, and that knowledge of the stuff is an expression of conscious soul. They're conscious of the nature of the way form works and the way it takes form. There are people who are extremely deft, and those are people with a lot of conscious soul. Now this is very, very brief. This is something that we can and do spend our entire life working on. We experience it, and I hope that it's a little closer to our waking experience as a result of sharing the way that I've tried to wake up to it in myself, or that I have waked up into myself and have tried to put it into words is a better way of saying it. So that is a meaning of soul. Now we have to go to one more meaning of the word soul. And this is the one that is the most common meaning, and is also the most misused meaning of the word soul. Again, it is used with an article, usually an indefinite article. No, it's as when we say, she's a good soul. In this usage, the meaning of soul is identical with individual spiritual focus. This usage of a soul is the same as a spirit. And this confused meaning is so prevalent that I doubt that it'll ever be corrected in our language. People who have grown up with common usage even though it is misusage, are adamant about sticking to it. They feel it's their heritage, just like some people feel it's their heritage to carry guns and shoot people. That's a tough issue with gun control. There's a wonderful movie going around now called Bowling for Columbine. And some people believe, they grow up, and their relationship with their father came through learning how to kill things with a gun. And because they love their father, they associate having guns taken away from them as having their love and their father taken away from them. It happens in society like that. What's even worse about this is that this misuse of the word soul is given credence, because for hundreds and hundreds of years, philosophers and theologians have used the word this way, even though they know better. They sell out the popular usage. In these talks, whenever we use the word soul, it will not be to mean individual spirit, or individual spiritual focus, or oneness that is realized through the triangularity or triangulation that we spoke of earlier. However, we may use a meaning that touches on this usage and that is so important that it is really appealing. The Spirit is the one thing that we all have most in common. It's the most unifying, the most abstract, and the most predominant part of our being is the Spirit, and that we all have in common. But when we think about that, and when we experience it, it's almost baffling. Because the more somebody becomes awake and aware and functioning in the Spirit, the more unique and different they are. It's a paradox that people who are spiritually awakened seem more different than they are more alike. That is because the universal spirit of which they have specialized, that focus that they have triangulated in their abstract being, is stronger, and it lights up the flavor. The flavor, the unique quality of each individuated spirit, is not the predominant thing. The unity is, but because the unity is stronger, it lights up the flavor, and at first we notice the uniqueness. Eventually, we begin to understand the greater reality, which is the unity, and we don't look at so much at how unique people are. We love their uniqueness, but we love it for what is lighting it up, and that is the Spirit. Now, in terms of evolutionary things, in a large scale or a large scope of things, this uniqueness has to do with the very nature of Spirit. Spirit can be everything. Everything comes from Spirit. Everything becomes in Spirit. And everything returns, so to speak, to Spirit. In the vastness and greatness, Spirit seems unchangeable. And that is true with perspective. But it has the solubility of the experience whereby Spirit becomes itself as part of its nature. And everything, even though there is assimilation, everything is not complete at that point. Ultimate unity of everything, where there is no differentiation whatsoever, is a far, far distant time from now. Evolutionary creation is not in vain. It's for keeps. It is fed and it is changed in its potential by manifest existence. all of our experiences, all of our states of existence do become soul material. And that soul material is eventually spiritualized as spirit. Thus, what we do is what we become in spirit. This is analogous to the way mother's milk changes in taste to the child according to what the mother has eaten. So when we say of someone that she's a gentle soul, what we mean is that the spirit inhabiting the female body manifests general behavior because it has absorbed and assimilated material from experience that awakens gentleness. So what we're saying is that the soul of that particular spirit is gentle. And this is so much so that the flavor that is the uniqueness that we recognize someone, like even listening to a piece of music, we know that it's Bach because it has the flavor that is Bach. Not just the mental characteristics and techniques. It has the flavor of everything that being that we call Bach has experienced and has assimilated into its spirit as soul. It has that flavor because that's what has been done. So this is the most prevalent use or misuse of the word soul, but we can see where it comes from. Because people are, even in spirit, what they have done. So we have seen 4 distinct usages of the word soul. One, it is the quality or flavor or attitude of a group, such as Melissa is the soul of the argument. Almost a trivial distinction. Second usage, we have seen that soul is everything between the dense body and the spirit. That is the vital body, the desire body, the concrete mind. And that usage of soul has reality because it is a quasi-autonomous being, a lower nature. And it is gendered, as the psychologists say, which call it the psyche, as either male or female, depending on the gender of the physical body. The third usage of the word soul is the spiritualized products of the body that, through realized experience, are taken into and incorporated into the spirit as new awakened power and potentiality.
You named the first 2.
I named.
Consciousness, intellectual.
I gave this 3 different names: conscious soul, intellectual soul, and emotional soul. Yeah.
First time I heard emotional soul.
Yeah, no, I mentioned this. I slipped it past you. That's what happens when there's a lot of verbiage.
I thought there was a reason why you did it.
No. And finally, we have the 4th usage. It is the most common usage, but it's the one that's in error in almost all usage, and that is the flavor of the individualized spirit resulting from soul growth experiences. Now, when we use these terms, it's going to come up in the next couple days. Tomorrow is going to be a very difficult talk about consciousness. And then on Monday we'll come back to the topic of soul growth, and that'll be an even more difficult topic, but it's central to everything that we do in Rosicrucian work. So we have seen several usages for spirit. Number 1, we have seen spirit as that which by intent does everything while appearing to do nothing, at least as seen from a material perspective. It does everything holistically, and it does everything internal to its own spiritual being. The dictionary calls this a motive principle, not a motive force, but a motive principle. The second usage we've seen is a spirit as a threefold objectified being, a focus, a being of universal spirit, no matter what degree of realization. There is one final use of the term that is often used with an article also. It is called a spirit, and that usually refers to an earthbound entity or a ghost or something like that, but we'll hardly ever use that. But it's good to remember that there is that, like spirits that inhabit the graveyard. It's a different usage. We've been encountering it in Shakespeare, where it's even foreshortened into the word sprite. We'll probably not be using that in any of the rest of the talks. So let's close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, that we may serve Thee better day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.